and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. I'm Amber Duke, thrilled to be joined, as always, by Jessica Burbank. Jessica, good morning.
Good morning. Happy Friday, Amber.
Happy Friday. Guns and school shootings are back in the news cycle. From the classroom to the courtroom, on Thursday, former assistant principal Ebony Parker of Richneck Elementary School in Newport News was charged with 8 counts of felony child abuse and disregard for failing to aid first grade teacher Abby Zwerner after she was shot by a 6-year-old Richneck student in Virginia. The incident occurred last year in January of 2023. According to court documents, Zwerner stumbled into the front office seeking help, but Parker and the principal were in their own offices behind locked doors. Zwerner passed out in the lobby. The first court hearing happened Thursday, and the next one will be on May 17th to set a trial date.
This follows a brand new poll Pew Research published that revealed nearly 1 in 4 teachers reported that in the last year their schools went into a gun-related lockdown. The poll found that 59% of K-12 educators feel at least somewhat worried a shooting in their school could happen. 18% said they are extremely worried. Conversely, 31% reported not being too worried, and 7% reported that they aren't worried at all. The finding comes as school shootings are peaking at an all-time high, with 82 reported in 2023. This year, 50 incidents have already been reported. So we're seeing a rise of school shootings, attempts to change gun safety laws. I'm from a state in North Carolina where, some of the gun safety laws have been pulled back, namely having to go to the sheriff's office to get a permit before purchasing a firearm. Now you can go just directly to a store where you purchase a firearm and they do a background check right there. The gun will be, licensed in your name to wherever your residence is. There's no need to go to the sheriff's office. They saw a huge boom in people obtaining firearms. Now, I think the population of people that's always talking about how we need gun safety, and they're very afraid of these things called high-capacity magazines. Some people think, 10 or more bullets is a high-capacity magazine, and that's just not reality. Simple handguns can, hold 14 bullets. Handgun like a Glock 17, like the one I have, it is a significant amount of bullets. But when you think about training at the range, when you think about, being in a situation where you want to keep yourself safe, moving from a state like Massachusetts, where my apartment had broken into, I couldn't get my hands on a gun if I really wanted to, which I did for 2 weeks, just as a personal safety firearm to keep at home. And so some of these gun safety regulations are not really targeting the problem, which is people who want to do school shootings with assault rifles. And they tend to just really hinder the ability for people to obtain personal safety weapons, while leaving the issue of people who are doing these mass shootings, whether at a school or otherwise, still easily able to access a gun, whether legally or illegally.
Yeah, especially since we've seen repeatedly that the main problem with the inability to stop school shootings is not really the person's access to a firearm, but the fact that they are repeatedly reported to places like the FBI or local authorities, and our law enforcement officials fail to follow up on these tips and make sure that these people are taken care of. And a lot of these people have prior mental health issues that were ignored, and all of these other underlying reasons why they went on to commit the school shooting. And yet we constantly place the focus on gun, even though we know that the vast majority of gun owners are law-abiding citizens who want to have their ability to protect themselves, which is a right enshrined in the Second Amendment of the Constitution. The government has to protect that God-given right. There's also a lot of issue with the way that we track mass and school shootings in America. There's a lot of conflation of different types of shootings that all fall into this single category of school shootings. I remember doing a breakdown of the data that was published in a tracker by CNN and Washington Post that was published by CNN and Washington Post, but it's a tracker that was created by Everytown for gun safety. And they claimed that there were 22 school shootings in like the first 6 months of 2018, for example. And it turned out that their tracker includes shootings that happen on any school campus, even if it wasn't what we normally consider to be a school shooting, which is an individual going into the school and trying to kill as many as people as possible. So this would include, for example, if you're on a college campus and there's a gang-related incident, it includes accidental firearm discharges in parking lots of college campuses. It includes domestic disputes in dorm rooms. It's not tracking just someone going into an elementary, middle, or high school and committing an active shooting. And the same problem exists with mass shootings. When we look at the FBI's database of what constitutes a mass shooting, it's basically any mass casualty event that kills 4 or more people. But again, when you break down the data, the Daily Caller did a great analysis of all of this. They found that more than 95% of what the FBI constitutes as a mass shooting was either gang or criminally related, and was the type of situation where an argument escalates outside of, let's say, a nightclub or a bar in an urban area, and somebody pulls out a gun and starts shooting. Again, when we are talking about mass shootings and the way that we want to change our gun laws to tackle them, we're not talking about these types of incidents typically. We're talking about these lone wolves who go into a movie theater or a mall and have the intention of just killing as many people as possible. They're usually pre-planned. They have some kind of motive. The person has some kind of mental illness underlying their desire to do this. And so when we're lumping all of these different types of shootings into one category, it's not helpful for us to do that and then try to use one overarching public policy to attack all of these different disparate types of shootings.
Absolutely. A public policy is only as good as it can be enforced. So let's imagine like the dream scenario for people who really want these guns off of the streets. These are people who read research. And it really gets me as someone who has a background in research and cares about progress and cares about kids not dying, cares about mass shootings not happening very deeply. But I think about the data where people say if you get a firearm, you're much more likely to be shot by a gun. And the assumption is that getting a gun suddenly makes you very unsafe. Rather, what they're measuring is the fact that when someone is in some kind of danger, they're much more likely to go and purchase a firearm to try and protect themselves. So you've already narrowed the data to a pool of people that is arming themselves likely for a reason, likely because they are in some kind of imminent danger. And so this assumption that guns make you unsafe is oftentimes based on not understanding the full picture there. But let's imagine a scenario where they do have this huge buyback program. They say, you know what, we're going to buy everyone's guns back at 3 times the rate because we've done the calculations and it turns out, paying law enforcement to come and pry them out of people's hands is actually going to be far more costly and less effective than just buying firearms back. How many people are really going to surrender their firearms? There are so many Americans with guns that there are more guns than the population of people in the United States. That is a significant amount of firearms. We've already had this proliferation of oftentimes assault rifles, but a lot of times they're just smaller personal safety weapons. Sometimes they're even collectible guns. When we think about, the guns that are already out there, are we, even if we pursue the most extreme policy, realistically going to get them off of the streets? And I think when you deal with that reality, it becomes very clear that pursuing restrictions on the sale of guns, restrictions on people purchasing new weapons, it's not really going to do much of anything to solve this problem of mass shootings, because anyone who wants to get a gun will be able to get one. We would have to have many years at a time of a gun buyback policy to achieve some level of reduction in the proliferation we've seen. It's just the case that if someone wants to get a gun to do a mass shooting, to do something bad, it's very likely in our lifetimes, even if we pursue the most ambitious policy, that they will be able to get one.
Yeah, and there's often this confusion that people like to put forth over the Australian gun buyback program by claiming that it significantly reduced mass shootings and homicides. And when you look at the data, it turns out that the homicide rate had already been falling very drastically in Australia before they implemented that program, and further analysis determined that it wasn't as effective as people claimed. And gun safety continues to be a hot button topic ahead of the 2024 election, with President Biden ramping up efforts to curb gun sales. On Thursday, the Justice Department announced that it was submitting a final rule aimed at closing the so-called gun show loophole. This rule would change the definition of firearm sellers who are, quote, engaged in business, and would require more sellers at gun shows, flea markets, and over the internet to conduct background checks, as they would no longer be considered private transactions. The intent is to make it so gun buyers will no longer be able to avoid background checks. Here's Attorney General Merrick Garland on the expanded rule.
If you sell guns predominantly to earn a profit, you must be licensed and you must conduct background checks. This regulation is a historic step in the Justice Department's fight against gun violence.
The so-called gun show loophole, Jess, is something that comes up often from people who are interested in restricting guns and what they call gun safety legislation. And it's just a misnomer to begin with, because I'm sure, as you know, anyone who is a private seller, regardless of where they are selling the firearm, whether it's at a gun show or over the internet, is not required to conduct background checks because they're not federally licensed dealers. So whether you're at a gun show or not, if you're a federally licensed dealer, you have to conduct a background check. If you're a private seller, you don't. What the Biden administration is trying to do here is they're basically trying to expand the definition of who has to get a federal license in order to sell their firearms. And I don't know that, one, this is going to survive a court challenge, which is surely coming, but two, how much this is actually going to be effective in its stated goal of preventing guns from falling into the wrong hands at gun shows, which is a very rare phenomenon in the first place. But it also just seems like it will have a chilling effect on people who do want to just, sell grandpa's gun, and they go to a gun show because they know that they're going to encounter a lot of people there who are likely willing to buy it. A lot of those people are going to erroneously think under this new rule that they have to get a federal license in order to sell that gun. And you're basically just cracking down again on people who are either hobbyists or who just have a gun or two that they want to offload to somebody else. And again, I don't really see the difference between selling a firearm at a gun show to somebody and selling it to a friend or family member. Those two things are functionally the same, and yet the Biden administration is acting like people who go to gun shows are specifically trying to avoid background checks when that's just not the case.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear based on the White House press release that the law is that if someone purchases a gun from you, right, at a gun show, that's what this is supposed to regulate, and they have the expectation that they can buy more than one, all that's going to change at these gun shows, I promise you, is a sign of just one gun purchase per person. It's really not going to prevent the sale of guns at gun shows. Also, like the type of guns, if you go to a gun show that are available for purchase, are typically collector type guns. If you want to buy, a kind of firearm that you're getting last minute because you want to do something bad, God forbid, the typical place people go is a place like a pawn shop. They're not waiting around for a gun show, which also doesn't happen very often. It's not like there's gun shows 24/7 in the rural South. I live in the rural South. I promise you the gun shows that happen are like once every few months, if that. In the county where my family lives, I've only seen one gun show every year. This assumption that they're just readily available because of the gun show loophole is just not reality. And I want to go back to that Australia buyback study because it's referenced so much as this great success. They've purchased over 650,000, I think it's 659,000 guns since the law was enacted in 1996. There are 494 million firearms in the United States. It would take hundreds of years for this law to be effective in the United States if we pursued an ambitious policy like in Australia, which is very unlikely to get Congress to say, yes, we will absolutely put the dollars forward to purchase back guns that we will decide to ban. It's just not a realistic policy proposal. And this gun show law, I'm sorry, it's really not going to change anything. I don't think people are even going to gun shows and expecting to purchase more than one gun from one seller. So this law, I really don't think is going to change gun sales, frankly, at all at gun shows.
Yeah, it seems like the Biden administration is trying to oversell just how big of a move they're making here. But again, I do think it will potentially have a chilling effect on buyers and sellers in terms of people who might have previously sold a gun through a private transaction might be freaked out now because they think that Biden's going to come after them. And based on history, they might be right. We currently have this Cargill case going through the Supreme Court regarding the ATF's classification of bump stocks and making those illegal, and whether or not they were able to do that. So the Biden rulemaking in the past on guns has gotten them in trouble. I would suspect that it's probably going to be the case here as well. We're going to have to leave it there, but we'll be back with more Rising after this.